It is January 25th, 1990. A 24-year-old British man named Paul Onions is standing on the side of the Hume Highway, south of Sydney, with a backpack on his shoulders and 40 Australian dollars in his pocket. He is looking for work, looking for adventure, and like thousands of young travelers before him, he believes that hitchhiking in Australia is the kind of thing you do when you're young and the world still feels enormous and safe. A car slows down. The driver is friendly. He introduces himself as Bill. He's an Australian bloke, stocky, confident, easy with a smile. Paul gets in. For the first 20 minutes, Bill is the perfect companion. He talks about the countryside. He asks Paul about England, about his travels. Then, somewhere south of the town of Mittagong, something shifts. The questions get more pointed. Where exactly are you going? Will anyone know you're there? Do you have family expecting you? Paul starts to feel uneasy. He asks to be dropped off. Bill pulls over. Not at a town, not at a gas station, but on the edge of a dense state forest. He reaches under the seat. He pulls out a revolver and a length of rope. This is a robbery, he says. Paul Onions does something that, by all logic, he should not have survived. He throws open the car door and runs into traffic, into oncoming lanes, screaming. A woman named Joanne Barry sees a terrified man flagging her down in the middle of the highway, and she stops. She drives him to the nearest police station. Paul files a report, replaces his stolen passport, and eventually flies home to England. He tells people he had a close call. He tells himself it was just a robbery gone wrong. He doesn't know that less than 1 kilometer from where that car pulled over, in a place police would later call Executioner's Drop, the bodies of young travelers are already hidden beneath the leaves. He doesn't know that the man who called himself Bill has been hunting on this highway for years, and he doesn't know that in 4 years' time, after the largest criminal investigation in Australian history, he is going to be the one who finally stops him. Between 1989 and 1993, 7 young people disappeared while hitchhiking in New South Wales, Australia. They were aged between 19 and 22. They came from 3 countries, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Australia. They were adventurous, budget-conscious travelers using one of the most common modes of transport available to backpackers in the country at the time, hitchhiking. Until the mid-1990s, hitchhiking in Australia was considered a normal, if not completely risk-free, way to get around. The country is vast, the roads are long, and the culture was one of openness. Youth hostels posted boards where travelers advertised rides. The Hume Highway, the long flat corridor linking Sydney to Melbourne, was one of the most traveled hitchhiking routes in the country. It was also the hunting ground of Ivan Robert Milat. Milat was born on December 27, 1944, in Guildford, New South Wales, the 6th of 14 children in a family of Yugoslavian immigrant background. He grew up in a rural, insular household. He was described by those who knew him as good-looking, muscular, and meticulous about his appearance. He had a lifelong obsession with firearms and hunting. He worked for most of his adult life as a road worker for the Roads and Traffic Authority of New South Wales, a job that gave him intimate knowledge of the state's highways, forests, and remote access tracks. He was also a man with a criminal history stretching back to his teens, burglary, break-ins, and a 1971 rape charge from which he was ultimately acquitted. The 7 people Ivan Milat murdered were James Gibson, 19, and Deborah Everest, 19, both Australians from Melbourne, last seen December 1989. Simone Schmidl, 21, a German national, last seen January 1991. Anja Habschied, 20, and Gabor Neugebauer, 21, a German couple, last seen December 1991. Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22, both British, last seen April 1992. Their bodies were found between September 1992 and November 1993 in a remote section of the Belanglo State Forest, approximately 9 miles or 15 kilometers southwest of the NSW town of Berrima, in an area investigators would come to call, with grim accuracy, executioner's drop. The case that would become Australia's most notorious serial murder investigation did not begin with a tip or a witness. It began with a group of runners. On September 19, 1992, orienteering enthusiasts were running a course through the Belanglo State Forest when they came across something that stopped them cold: decomposing human remains, partially concealed by leaves and branches. Police attended and found a second body nearby. Both were identified as British backpackers, Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters. They had last been seen in April 1992 as they made their way to the Hume Highway, looking for a lift south of Sydney. They were found face down, hands pulled behind their backs. According to court documents and forensic reports, the injuries to both women were severe. Joanne Walters had been stabbed repeatedly, including at least one wound to her spine that forensic experts believe may have paralyzed her before she died. Caroline Clark had been shot multiple times in the head, apparently used for target practice. There were indications of sexual assault on both women, though the degree of decomposition complicated definitive findings, according to the NSW deputy coroner. A massive search of the forest followed. Over 300 police officers. No further remains were found. The investigation stalled. 13 months passed. On October 3, 1993, a local man searching for firewood in a remote section of the same forest found a human skull and a thigh bone. Police responded and recovered the remains of not one but two additional victims, later identified as Australian teenagers James Gibson and Deborah Everest, who had gone missing nearly 4 years earlier in December 1989. The following month, November 1993, 3 more sets of remains were found in the same forest. Simone Schmidl, the German backpacker missing since January 1991. Gabor Neugebauer, missing since December 1991. Anya Habschied, whose remains were among the most disturbing found at the site. According to court evidence, she had been decapitated. Her skull was never recovered. In total, 7 victims, all between 19 and 22. All had been hitchhiking, all found face down, hands restrained behind their backs, concealed beneath vegetation. Many had been shot, stabbed, or both. Several showed signs of sexual assault. Superintendent Clive Small, who would lead the investigation, confirmed publicly what had been feared for weeks. New South Wales had a serial killer. Superintendent Clive Small established what became known as Task Force Air, one of the largest criminal investigations in Australian history. At its peak, the task force involved hundreds of officers, forensic specialists, criminal profilers, and analysts. A $500,000 reward, an enormous sum for the time, was offered for information leading to an arrest. The phone lines were flooded. Over the weeks that followed, thousands of calls poured in from members of the public across New South Wales. The task force entered every tip into a computer database that quickly became overwhelmed. Credible leads were buried beneath the sheer volume of noise. The forensic picture that was emerging, however, was specific. The killer, or killers, had operated in a single remote forest across a 4-year period, targeted hitchhiking backpackers who were unlikely to be missed quickly, used multiple methods of killing, including shooting, stabbing, and blunt force, made deliberate, methodical attempts to conceal the bodies. Apparently not financially motivated, the victims' travelers' checks were never cashed, their credit cards never used. That last detail was striking. According to investigators and forensic psychologists quoted in media coverage of the trial, the killings appeared to be about something other than money. The victims were being selected, controlled, and, in the clinical language of criminal profiling, dominated. Police also noted something deeply disturbing about the crime scenes. the precision. The bodies were placed in a configuration that suggested not panic or disorganization, but deliberate, practiced procedure. This was not someone who had committed a single crime of opportunity. This was someone who had done this before. Among the thousands of calls pouring into the task force, two would eventually prove decisive, but in late 1993, they were buried in the database. The first was from a woman whose partner worked with a man she believed should be questioned. He owned a property near the forest. He drove a four-wheel drive. He owned a lot of guns. His name was Ivan Milat. The second was from a woman named Joanne Barry, who mentioned that in January 1990, she had picked up a terrified British hitchhiker on the Hume Highway near the Belanglo State Forest after he had escaped a man with a gun. Paul Onions had not forgotten what happened to him, and when the news about the Belanglo murders reached England in late 1993, he contacted Australian police directly. Paul Onions had arrived in Australia in early 1990 with the spirit of a genuine traveler. He was 24 years old, a Royal Navy veteran, and air conditioning mechanic from Birmingham, England. He wanted sunshine, adventure, and a bit of distance from ordinary life. He'd heard that fruit-picking jobs were available in the Riverina district, several hundred miles south of Sydney. So on January 25th, 1990, he took a train to Liverpool on the outskirts of the city and stuck out his thumb on the Hume Highway. A man pulled over. He was confident, friendly. He introduced himself as Bill. According to Onion's statement, everything seemed normal at first. Bill talked about the road, about the country, about life in New South Wales. But as the time passed, the questions changed. They became intrusive. Bill wanted to know exactly where Paul was going, whether anyone would be looking for him, whether he had family expecting contact. Then Bill started talking about foreigners. His tone shifted. According to Onions, the driver began making racist and xenophobic remarks. Paul became frightened. He asked to be let out of the car. Bill pulled onto the shoulder of the highway, just south of the town of Mittagong, less than half a mile or 1 kilometer from the boundary of the Belanglo State Forest. He reached under his seat and produced a revolver and a rope. "This is a robbery," he said. Paul Onions made a decision in a split second. He threw open the passenger door and ran onto the highway, into traffic, waving his arms. Bill got out of the car and fired at least one shot. Onions kept running. Joanne Barry, a passing motorist, saw a man running in terror on the highway and pulled over. She drove Paul to the Bowral police station. He filed a report, described the attacker and the car, and gave as much detail as he could. His life. He replaced the passport through the Australian consulate and tried to move on. But in late 1993, when news of the Belanglo murders was being covered internationally, Paul Onions recognized something: the location, the method, the profile. He called the Australian High Commission and was given the task force hotline number. On November 13th, 1993, he told investigators the full story of what had happened to him on the Hume Highway in January 1990. He was asked why he hadn't come forward sooner. He had. The Bowral police report was missing. According to investigators, the only record of it was a single handwritten entry in a constable's notebook. Onions flew to Sydney on May 2nd, 1994. He was shown a photographic lineup. He identified Ivan Milat immediately. 3 weeks later, Ivan Milat was arrested. Ivan Milat grew up as part of a large insular family. His parents had emigrated from Yugoslavia, and the family, ultimately 14 children, lived a rural life that kept largely to itself. The family's private nature made it difficult for investigators, journalists, and biographers to piece together a reliable account of his childhood. What is established by court records and family interviews is this: from his mid-teens, Ivan Milat had a criminal history. He was jailed for burglary and break-ins in the 1960s. He was charged with the rape of 2 female hitchhikers in 1971, a charge he was acquitted of. with the assistance of a prominent family lawyer. In 1977, according to later investigative reporting and task force files, Milat encountered two women hitchhiking near the area of the future murders. He was never charged in that incident, but investigators later believed he had attempted to abduct or assault them. One of those women, when shown a photo lineup in 1994, identified him. In 1975, Milat took a job as a road worker and truck driver. By the time of his arrest, he had worked on and off for the New South Wales Roads and Traffic Authority for approximately 20 years. That job gave him something invaluable for what investigators believed he was doing: an encyclopedic knowledge of the back roads, fire trails, and remote access tracks of the NSW hinterland, including the Belanglo State Forest. He was described by colleagues as competent, even meticulous. He drove four-wheel drive vehicles and was known for an extensive and serious collection of firearms. He was also known to frequent the Belanglo area and surrounding forests on hunting and camping trips. At the time of his arrest, Milat was 49 years old. He had been married, was currently in a relationship, and presented to the outside world as a working-class outdoorsman. He was not, by any public appearance, the kind of person who attracted suspicion. That invisibility was not accidental. Criminologist Wayne Petherick, an associate professor at Bond University, later observed that Milat's road authority work gave him regular exposure to hitchhikers, the very population he was targeting. Hitchhikers were, as Petherick noted in coverage of the case, an ideal target. They were unlikely to be missed quickly. Contact with family and friends was often sporadic, and their travel plans were deliberately open-ended. A missing backpacker could go weeks before anyone raised an alarm. Milat understood this better than anyone. On May 22, 1994, at approximately 6 a.m., 50 police officers surrounded a house at Cinnabar Street, Eagle Vale, the southwestern Sydney suburb, where Ivan Milat was living with his sister, Shirley Swar. Armed officers from the Tactical Operations Unit took positions around the perimeter. Milat was arrested without incident. He was initially charged with robbery and weapon offenses relating to the Onion's attack. He did not confess. He did not break. He looked at the officers and said nothing of consequence. Then investigators began searching the house. What they found, in the words of the subsequent court proceedings, was extraordinary. Behind a wall in the house, investigators found a .22 caliber Anschutz Model 1.441/42 rifle and parts of a .22 caliber Ruger 10/22. These weapons were of the type used in several of the backpacker killings. Forensic ballistics experts would later confirm a match between ammunition found in the house and cartridge cases recovered from the Belanglo crime scenes. But the weapons were only the beginning. Hidden throughout the house, not buried, not locked away, but hidden in plain sight among the general clutter, investigators found items belonging to the murdered backpackers: a water bottle consistent with one owned by Simone Schmidl, a sleeping bag belonging to Deborah Everest, camping equipment, cameras, and clothing linked to multiple victims. Foreign currency. The travelers had been carrying cash that was never spent after their disappearances. A knife matching the description Paul Onions had given of the weapon produced during his attack. At the same time, over 300 police officers were simultaneously executing search warrants on properties belonging to 5 of Milat's brothers and his mother. The combined operation uncovered 24 additional firearms and approximately 550 pounds or 250 kilograms of ammunition. Forensic psychologist Holly Schiff, commenting on the case, observed that killers who retain victims' belongings often do so because they view the items as proof of their capability. They are trophies. According to Schiff, Milat's retention of these items suggested he believed he was too intelligent, too careful to ever be caught. On May 31st, 1994, Ivan Milat was formally charged with all 7 murders. The trial of Ivan Milat, opened at the New South Wales Supreme Court on March 26, 1996, in what became the longest and most complex criminal trial in Australian history up to that point. It would run for 18 weeks. Over 200 witnesses gave evidence. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi, built its case on an interlocking framework, forensic science, and witness testimony. Central to the prosecution's case were the ballistics match between weapons found in Milat's home and ammunition recovered from the crime scenes, the victim's belongings found hidden in the house, Paul Onion's eyewitness identification, the cornerstone of the case, the confirmation that Milat had not been at work on any of the days the victims were last seen alive, the fact that Milat had sold his silver Nissan Patrol four-wheel drive shortly after the bodies were first publicly discovered in 1992. Multiple witnesses who described Milat's obsession with firearms and his detailed knowledge of the Belanglo area. Milat pleaded not guilty to all charges. He testified in his own defense. His legal team attempted to shift blame onto his brothers, arguing that members of the Milat family, particularly Richard Milat, were the actual perpetrators, and that Ivan was an innocent man whose family name had condemned him. The jury did not accept this argument. On July 27, 1996, after deliberating on the evidence, the jury found Ivan Milat guilty of all 7 murders and of the attempted abduction and robbery of Paul Onions. The sentencing remarks made by Justice David Hunt became one of the most quoted passages in the history of Australian criminal law. He sentenced Milat to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus additional terms for the Onions attack. But he also said something that has hung over the case ever since. In my view, Justice Hunt stated at sentencing, it is inevitable that the prisoner was not alone in that criminal enterprise. The lead detective of the task force publicly disagreed. He believed Milat acted alone. The question has never been definitively resolved. The conviction of Ivan Milat did not close the Belanglo case. It opened a set of questions that investigators, forensic professionals, and families have been living with for nearly 30 years. Did Milat have an accomplice? The most persistent unresolved question concerns whether Milat acted alone. Justice Hunt, in his sentencing remarks, said he believed it was inevitable that Milat had help. The nature of some of the crimes, the logistics of controlling multiple victims, the transport of bodies, led some investigators to believe a second person may have been present for at least some of the killings. On July 18, 2005, Milat's former lawyer, John Marsden, made a deathbed statement. According to Marsden, Milat had been assisted by his sister, Shirley Soare, who had lived with him in the Eagle Vale house where the evidence was found in the murders of the 2 British backpackers, Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters. Shirley Soare denied any involvement. No charges were ever brought against her. Marsden's statement was disputed and could not be tested in court. Investigators also received intelligence from within the Milat family. According to reporting from several Australian outlets, Milat's youngest brother George stated that Shirley was in on it. This claim was never substantiated with evidence that met a criminal standard. It is important to be clear, no accomplice was ever charged. No court has made any findings against any individual other than Ivan Milat. These claims are unproven. How many victims? Police have never publicly confirmed that the 7 convicted murders represent the full extent of Milat's crimes. In 2001, Milat was ordered to give evidence at a coronial inquest into the disappearances of 3 women in the Newcastle area in the late 1970s, but no case was ever brought due to a lack of evidence. Similar inquiries in 2003 and 2005 also resulted in no charges. In 2021, a 4-part documentary series, Ivan Milat, Backpacker Murderer, examined the possibility that Milat had up to 20 additional victims, including a German national, Lydia Knotts, who disappeared in Queensland in 1976, and an American woman, Barbara Carol Brown, who vanished in New South Wales in 1978. These are allegations and investigative theories. They are not established facts, and no charges were ever laid. Investigators have also noted a number of disappearances that share MO similarities with the confirmed murders, hitchhikers found in remote state forests dating back as far as 1971. The true extent of Milat's crimes may never be known. Why did it take so long? Perhaps the most uncomfortable question raised by the Milat case is a systemic one. Paul Onions reported his attack in January 1990. The Borough Police took a note in a notebook and did not follow up. When investigators researched for that report in April 1994, it was missing. Only a single constable's notebook entry confirmed the incident had ever been reported. Had that attack been properly investigated in 1990, it is possible, not certain, but possible, that Carolyn Clark, Joanne Walters, Simone Schmidl, Anja Habschied, and Gabor Neugebauer, all of whom disappeared after January 1990, might have survived. Ivan Milat did not accept imprisonment quietly. In his first year behind bars, he attempted to escape. He was transferred to the Goulburn Correctional Centre, one of Australia's highest security prisons, where he would spend the rest of his life. Over the years that followed, Milat engaged in repeated and escalating acts of self-harm. He swallowed razor blades. In one incident that attracted international attention, he used a makeshift implement to cut off one of his own fingers and reportedly threw it at a corrections officer. He appealed his conviction multiple times. Every appeal was refused. His final appeal was rejected on September 7, 2005. He gave one major media interview on the ABC program Australian Story in November 2004, in which he denied that any of his family had been involved in the murders. He maintained his innocence until the end. Ivan Milat was diagnosed with esophageal cancer while in prison. He died on October 27, 2019, at Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney. He was 74 years old. He never confessed. He never revealed whether there were other victims. He took whatever answers remained with him. The backpacker murders changed Australia. Hitchhiking, which had been a normal and celebrated part of Australian travel culture for decades, largely collapsed as a popular practice after the Belanglo discoveries. Youth hostels stopped posting hitchhiking boards. The romance of the open road took on a different complexion. The Hume Highway, which had for generations been a corridor of possibility for young travelers, was now also something else. The case also reshaped Australian policing. The formation of Task Force Air, the use of satellite imagery and computer databases in the investigation, and the eventual multi-agency approach that cracked the case all fed into new protocols for how serial murder cases would be handled in Australia going forward. Culturally, Milat's crimes inspired the 2005 film Wolf Creek, in which director Greg McLean described the central character, Mick, as a composite of Ivan Milat and another Australian killer. The film was deliberately designed to capture what McLean called the terror unique to Australia's geography. Look at how big Australia is. How do you find a body? The Belanglo State Forest remains a public forest. People still walk its trails, and investigators even now have never formally closed their inquiry into whether Ivan Milat's true victim count has been fully accounted for. Paul Onions declined the $200,000 reward that was offered for his part in Milat's conviction. In a 2010 media interview, he simply said he didn't want it. He was 24 years old when he ran onto a highway with a man shooting at him. He was the one who got away. He was also, in the end, the one who made sure the man who tried to kill him never got to do it again. Before we go, I want to hear from you. Paul Onions reported his attack to police in January of 1990. 5 more people died after that. Do you think the outcome of this case would have been different or did Milat cover his tracks well enough that the result was always going to be the same? And then there's the question that Justice Hunt raised at the hearing, the one that was never officially resolved. He said, on the record, that he believed Milat was not alone. The lead detective disagreed. 29 years later, no accomplice has ever been charged. Who do you believe was right? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read all of them. If this case is one you want to go deeper on, the Australian documentary series Ivan Milat, Backpacker Murderer from 2021 is an excellent starting point. It examines the question of additional victims with serious forensic rigor. If you want to stay across cases where modern forensics are rewriting cold case histories, hit subscribe. We cover these stories the way they deserve to be covered: factual, thorough, and with the victims at the center. I'll see you in the next one.